and we can move right into the conversation. This is a webinar really intended for us to extend time and go into a deeper dive on the Washington State Energy Code update that is underway this year. We're calling on members to lean in understanding what is being considered currently in the cycle of the update, and as industry begin to really illuminate the areas that we would like to spend time on to provide feedback to the council. The public hearing process is underway and close to wrapping up in not too long. So we're really asking all of you to take this time to lean in. We've got presenters who will cover the mechanical changes that are being considered, and we will be looking to you to ask them pointed questions to really help us coming out of this conversation with the clarity of what are the areas of strong interest for all of us as the affordable housing sector in this energy code cycle. As you know, we've got a very dedicated sustainable buildings initiative that has been coordinating on this work. They have some clear priorities that we've identified so far, but it would be far much more productive for all of us to be leaning in and just understanding the collective member perspective. With that, and no further ado, I will ask Laura Frankie on our team. And Laura, thank you for quickly coordinating and pulling this webinar together to introduce the panel of speakers today and the outline of what they will be covering. So Laura, over to you to introduce the first speaker.
Thank you, Patience. Thank you for joining us, everybody. I will be brief. We are going to do a briefing of the updates. As Patience mentioned, Chell Anderson from LMN Architects will lead us through that. And then we also have Deepa from Climate Solutions on the line, who will talk about some of the comments that have been prepared from their side. So I think that this is really set up to be an opportunity for discussion and questions. You're welcome to put your comments and questions into the chat, and we'll feed those to our speakers at the end, or you can just simply hold them and raise your hand, or just jump in, unmute at the end. This is not a formal convening by any stretch, but we really want to just give you an opportunity to get everything on the table that you're thinking about. So no further comments or questions from myself. I will turn it over to Chell to work us through the presentation.
All right, thank you. I'm happy to be here, happy to be speaking to you all. I am an architect. I work as an architect at LMN, worked on housing around the world, not necessarily affordable housing, but housing in many countries, including the US. I'm an architect, 25 years experience. I'm LMN's Director of Sustainable Design. I served on the Washington State Building Code Council for 7.5 years, and I ended my term earlier this year, so I'm neck deep in the energy code, and I was the chair of the technical advisory group for both the residential and commercial energy codes up until April of this year. And now I'm working behind the scenes with public comments and also talking to council members to make sure that the energy code is as good as it can be and passes and gets us on track for all of the legislative mandates we have for the energy code. So as was said, we're nearly through the energy code development for the 2024 codes is what they're being called, even though they won't go into force until May 3rd of 2027. So there's public code proposals that happened earlier, technical advisory groups that happened for nearly a year, and the written comments will be accepted through this Friday at midnight, and those can be sent to the Building Code Council, Dustin, or SBCC email address, which you can find on the website. There are public hearings, 8.5 and 8.7, where you can sign up and testify, or you can go in person, and you can also do remote to both of them. 8.5 is on the west side of the state, and 8.7 is on the east side of the state. Some people will show up in person, but you can always just zoom in to either of them and provide comments. You can sign up in advance, but they will also go through people who just show up and provide comments. And you can provide comments on any part of either energy code that you want. So after that happens, after the public comments, all public comments will stop 8/7 at midnight. The council will then have 3 or 4 work sessions where they discuss the energy code, and the public is invited to attend, but the public cannot comment unless asked for by a council member. So it's open to the public, but it's a closed door session for the council to discuss all the public comments that they've received and figure out their path forward for accepting some and rejecting others. If all goes well, the council adoption will be 9/25, and then the rule will be finalized, and that will be the code for the next 3 years in Washington. So this is a QR code to the State Building Code Council website. You can also just Google it or Bing it or whatever you're going to do with it. Your favorite search engine to get to Washington State Building Code Council. There are clear instructions on the left side of the web page that show you how to make comments on it. And you can email the managing director, or you could just email me and I can help figure it out for you. Okay, so this is a single page that contains a lot of energy code updates. And feel free to unmute and just ask your questions at any point or put them in the chat, or do whatever you want. I'm just going to run through a bunch of energy code changes. So affordable housing probably is under the commercial energy code, but it also could be under the residential code, depending upon the scale you're working at. The commercial energy code covers buildings greater than 3 stories and those with interior entries to units. The residential energy code covers buildings under 3 stories and that have exterior entries. So woody walk-ups is what they're affectionately called. So if you're familiar with the 2021 commercial energy code, it has a fossil fuel path. And if you use the fossil fuel path, you need to get additional energy credits under C406. The 2024 version merges the fossil fuel path with the prescriptive path. And the prescriptive path is based on using a gas appliance, using the lowest performing appliance, which is almost always a gas appliance for water heating and space heating. And then you have to get additional credits to get up to the code minimum. And those credits are based on using a heat pump in general, a heat pump for space heating and water heating. But instead of using those, you could use gas and just do other things like envelope measures or a higher percentage energy recovery or additional, water heating maybe, and then you could do other things. So there's a wider variety of credits you can get under the C406 path, but you have to achieve roughly the equivalent of an air source heat pump for heating and a air source heat pump for water heating as well. Generally, David Reddy could probably go into more detail on that. There's also housing has the same electric resistance carve-out had before, so you can put in a good deal of electric resistance, space heating, and it doesn't count against you. The CO46 path now contains interactive effects. So if you use a less efficient heating appliance, you get more credit for envelope measures. And if you use a more efficient heating appliance, you get less credit for envelope measures. So, that's a piece of it. So for instance, if you, I'll just say that, and if someone has questions, we can get into more detail on that. The solar requirement went from 0.5 watts per square foot to 0.75 watts per square foot. The current version of the commercial energy code has an exemption for affordable housing, some exemptions for affordable housing that we could get into. The concrete block exception, probably not that relevant, but that was removed. I think we're one of the few states that doesn't require a full U-value approach for concrete block. There's a triple glazing requirement where, so Seattle currently requires 20% of glazing to be triple, trying to get the market to just adopt triple as a low-cost solution that improves comfort and many other things. Right now, that's being put into the state requirements, and there's a letter that we're going to talk about later that would change this requirement in some way. But right now, for a lot of commercial buildings, you'd have to put in 20% triple glazing. There's a new way of looking at thermal bridging. Before there was um, some things you had to do. Now there's calculations you have to do, which is closer to passive house. It uses psi and chi values for points and lines of thermal bridging that have been in other systems but are now in the IECC 2024 and were adopted into the Washington State Energy Code 2024 as well. If you like energy modeling and the energy modeling path, the building performance factors, it still has the two pathways, the building performance and the total site energy path for C407. The building performance factors have been reduced, and the UA limit for the energy modeling path C407 has been reduced from 120% of the UA maximum to 110% of the UA maximum. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So that's the commercial energy code. David, do you want to add to that, clarify anything? You're on mute, by the way.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay? All right. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right. Yeah, I think you covered it well. Regarding that 110% UA limit, that just for everybody's information, that is just a kind of a backstop on how bad the envelope can be if you go the energy modeling path. It limits this trade-off between envelope and systems, and just kind of ensures that your envelope it doesn't have to meet the prescriptive requirements, but it can't be dramatically worse. And just a clarification, in Seattle, the triple pane glazing requirement was proposed in the 21 code cycle in Seattle, but it was not adopted in the end. This was brought forward at the state level, and that's something we're going to talk about later in kind of a letter that we proposed submitting for public comment.
Thanks, David. Do any of you use the residential energy code for affordable housing? Should we get into that?
No, I think it's okay to pass on it, and then if we can address questions if there are any specific to that part of the code, but I'm not seeing any raised hands or interest in going into the weeds on it.
Okay. There are also a bunch of other things that are in the building code now. The legislature passed a bunch of things and required the Building Code Council to include things. So there are three kind of big ones. The single stair, which is within the IBC now, you can do a smallish development with up to 6 stories, up to 4 units per floor, with a single stair, and that means the units can't open directly into the stair, but they can open into a short hallway that goes into the stair, and the stair needs to have, normal or enhanced fire safety. But this is a missing middle housing proposal, which is supposed to allow more small infill housing in the state. This will go into effect on May 3, 2027, along with all the other code proposals that we've talked about. There's also multiplex housing, and that's up to 6 units, up to 3 stories. And that allows more attached units to be part of a residential development. Right now, you can only have 2, and this would allow up to 6 units attached, up to 3 stories, and you can arrange them in different ways. If you look at stories on the Urbanist or in other areas, you can see that these typologies, how they might lay out in terms of on a site. And then one for larger buildings is a House bill passed that allows scissor stairs in apartments, which should free up some more space for housing. That's not yet in process, but that will be in the next code. Probably it could be in an interim code. I'm not sure. There's also smaller elevators per Senate bill, reduced parking minimums, and then there's also a cooling law that has landlords cannot prohibit tenants from or renters from installing portable cooling in their units, and I think that's going to have an impact, especially on housing that doesn't have any centralized cooling or any methods for cooling. Landlords will have to figure out how they're going to deal with that specific law. It's a law. It's not in the building code, so the building code might eventually adopt something like that. So Deepa, do you want to cover this, or David, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess in terms of overall impact on multifamily between the 2021 and 2024 energy codes, we've done some initial analysis, and I would say in regards to the envelope, we talked about some envelope changes. If in general, even though there's some added calculations that need to be done, if your consultant was accounting for thermal bridges properly already, which the code already covered, and although not as completely, then we are not expecting huge changes to the thermal envelope requirements. This 20% glazing requirement is one of the variables in that guideline, but I would say just based on a couple buildings that we looked at where we took the 21 code requirements and applied the 24, the same kind of considerations and details and assemblies were found to be compliant. Again, just that's assuming your building envelope consultant was already kind of taking account for those thermal bridges in their calculations using the prescriptive path. In terms of systems, as Shell mentioned, electric resistance heat, the same thresholds are present as an exception. But certainly there are credits available for installing heat pumps. And particularly on the water heating side, the credits are such that you have to do most all of the water heating using heat pumps. And that's in line with what we have seen in most new affordable housing developments in Seattle, especially because it is required, but even outside Seattle, just what we're, for general developer kind of decision-making process and to be compliant with future building performance standards, we've seen most projects go to all electric using heat pumps. So if you've already been doing that, then your systems aren't going to change dramatically under the 24 code. Shell mentioned cooling. So there's a lot of drivers to start adding cooling to the apartments where it wasn't necessarily included before. We're looking at some changes here that we're suggesting, specifically around mechanical equipment penetrations. So I guess maybe we could pivot into these public comment letters with some of the changes that we think could help support the affordable housing community and kind of maintaining compliance with the code, but also being able to use cost-effective systems. I don't know.
Yes.
I can.
So these are the These are
So
the two main things in the first public comment letter we wanted to talk about.
yeah, and in this group, if you've been participating in Exemplary Buildings program for a while, you may recall from the 21 Seattle Energy Code cycle when this was proposed for Seattle to do 20% triple pane glazing. The Exemplary Buildings program provided feedback to the city indicating that affordable housing in particular are using already modest levels of glazing in their buildings. And so the energy benefits and the competing embodied carbon considerations for adding triple pane glazing were not as significant as if you have floor to ceiling glass in lots of your apartment units, like a lot of the high rise and other buildings do. So what we provided feedback to the city on that. It was ultimately not adopted in this code cycle. It was adopted at the state level, and there is a letter circulating that is recommending that this 20% triple pane glazing requirement not apply to projects below 30% window to wall ratio. So for context, what we see most multifamily affordable is running around 25% window to wall ratio. So most affordable multifamily buildings would there if this recommendation is accepted by the council, then to remove the triple pane glazing requirement, then your projects would not need to put in triple pane glazing.
And I'll add to that so PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Labs, did the modeling for this energy code cycle for all the credits in C406. And what they came up with was that heating energy has really, really gone down due to ERVs, heat recovery, and envelopes, and a bunch of things. So, triple glazing in low glazing percentage buildings is not as impactful as it might have been 20 years ago or 10 years ago. So that's why we think it is reasonable to not require triple for 20% of windows for buildings below 30% window to wall ratio. So that's in the letter. That's one of the things in the letter is we're advocating to the council to add this exception for projects below 30% window to wall ratio.
Yeah, I would add this is a subtlety, but there is a change in how the window to wall ratio is calculated in the 24 code, which would generally result in a small increase in some buildings in this percentage ratio, but still we would expect most multifamily to still fall below 30% even with that change. So I think that there's also, this acknowledges like the logistical and kind of design consideration of identifying what 20% of those windows. A lot of times we're seeing projects incorporate triple pane maybe for acoustic reasons, and that's great. And there's a benefit there. But at least this would give teams the flexibility on how they apply higher performance glazing in projects.
Talk about the mechanical penetrations now.
Yeah. So this is one, if I don't know if you've been working through envelope compliance with your teams, and in the 21 Energy Code, there was a new provision added that required penetrations in the envelope specifically for mechanical equipment like packaged thermal heat pumps or vertical packaged heat pumps. Had to be if those penetrations added up to more than 1% of the wall area. You had to account for them separately in the calculations, and it generally required other envelope improvements to offset that equipment penetration. There's a public comment letter that's Deepa linked to that recommends that provision, some clarifications on the wording, but also adding an exception for if say you use a package terminal heat pump or other other heat pump equipment that uses a variable speed compressor and has good low temperature heating performance, then that you would not have to account for that mechanical equipment penetration. This would effectively allow you to not have to make building envelope improvements if you invest in a better piece of equipment. And what we've found is that better piece of equipment, there are more options that can meet the requirement we're proposing. And they're more cost effective than some of the other heat pump alternatives. So this would just generally make it a little less costly or with not major impacts to building performance to install heat pumps in your building. So hopefully everybody can get a chance to look at that letter and sign on for those changes. We think they're topics that we've talked about within this group. And I'm hoping they address some of those concerns that we've raised in the past.
Yeah, thanks, David and Chell. I'll just hop in to give the call to action, which is again to sign this housing affordability letter. I've posted the letter itself and the sign-on form in the chat, and I can also share those with Laura to send out afterwards. We are asking for organizational or business sign-ons by 5 p.m. on Thursday because Friday is the last day to submit comments. So please go ahead and read it and sign on if you can. There are also 3 other letters that Shift Zero is heading that are linked in the beginning of that letter. One is on the way that solar and renewables are treated in the code. The second is on the ERI pathway in the code. And the third is about fixing an error in the CR 102. So feel free to take a look at those letters as well if you are potentially interested in signing on to any of them. Please, you can contact Rachel Kohler, she's the managing director of Shift Zero, and her email is in the header of all of those letters. So, but I would say this one is the primary one that we're really hoping for support on at this moment from the affordable housing community.
Yeah, and I would add on the solar letter, one of the things that letter recommends is to revise the metric that is used for quantifying how much solar or other renewable energy systems are put on your building to make it to encourage better siting and orientation of those solar systems. Basically, if you do somewhat optimize the solar installation, you don't actually have to put as much solar on your building as if you had used the standard watt per square foot metric. And it also means buildings on the east side of the state where there's a lot more in general solar availability, like more solar energy to harness, that you also would not have to put as much solar capacity on your building. But in the end, it's still the same amount of expected energy savings. It's just recognizing that there is a difference in solar potential depending on your site. So that's one important change. Another one is that it would not, for people that might be developing, say, 4-story walk-up housing built projects where there are not a lot of what we call house electrical loads. Mainly it's just the lighting for the stairwells and corridors. Then, depending on the size of the building, there is an added exception that does not require you to put solar on your building if you don't actually have the electrical loads to offset that larger system. So, in other words, it's going to help you make sure you can right size that system. And the trade-off is that you will have to do some other efficiency measures to make up for the lower solar requirement. And then probably the most important one is that it does remove the affordable housing exception. So if people are familiar with the Seattle Energy Code, there is an exception for affordable housing in that you don't have to put solar on your projects in Seattle. But at the state level, there has been no exception. And the even though the current draft does include the affordable housing exception, removing it is just more or less making it more consistent with what was in the 21 code and making it uh, um, more universal across the projects that you're going to be working on, whether it's in outside of Seattle or inside Seattle. And the other thing is it recognizes is a lot of projects were already putting solar on their buildings anyways, mainly for the 4% low income tax credit option that you could get on your application. So we were already seeing quite a bit of solar being put on projects, even if it wasn't required in Seattle. So um, we think that there's some really useful, important changes in that letter on the solar uh, section, and hopefully people, if you have any questions here, happy to answer and take a look at the letter. Recommend it if you can look at it and can support it, that'd be great.
All right, any questions? Any additional thoughts? Go ahead, Kimberly.
Yeah, thank you both for going over this in detail. I just had a question about I guess we didn't really talked a little bit about it, but the hot water heat pump or heat pump hot water, like you talked, I knew there was some concern about it going to 100%. And I wasn't sure if that was still a concern, or I know you mentioned it, and sorry if I missed it, that had been addressed, but I know that was a concern of that potentially changing statewide to 100%. And I was just curious if there was still concern about that, or that had kind of shifted to the concern, or because I know I didn't see that in the letter, so just curious about that.
Yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, prescriptively, there is no requirement to do, you could use fossil fuel for water heating if you can make up for an equivalent amount of energy savings in your building with other measures. But I can say that the credit targets for C406, which is where you have the flexibility on options, are based around the idea that you're going to use at least roughly 80% of your 80% of the heating is going to be met with heat pumps. And the balance could be met with fossil fuels or electric resistance. The but and again, that's just kind of where the targets were set. There is no requirement. You have flexibility on that ratio, or again, not putting any heat pumps in. But it's going to be a challenge and probably more costly to not do some fraction of heat pump water heating in your new buildings.
Okay, so just to clarify, the increased capacity, maybe I missed it, is not a requirement.
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
and
Okay,
I
so there's
could
not, okay.
yeah, and unfortunately, the current draft of the energy code has some inconsistencies in that area, and there is kind of a separate working group that's making comments to clean that up. But um, we're assuming those comments are accepted because it really is not clear in the current code draft. Um, so, but that was the intent of kind of shifting the system requirements, mostly driven by the C4, the optional credit section, and giving you credits for using higher efficiency water heating equipment.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, there's a group who's working on fixing that and making it more clear and aligned, yet there's not a need right now to testify on that or to send a letter in, or there's not any directive for that right now.
You could
So,
potentially, if somebody wanted to show up at the Building Code Council and say, we understand that there's some challenges and there's a letter of support. or a letter of, suggesting some changes, and we support that letter, that might be, useful.
Okay.
There is a lot of support, and I don't know. It's being drafted right now and being finalized right now, and it changes that section. But if somebody shows up and advocates for, we want the flexibility to use a bunch of heat pump, maybe some gas and storage. If those are the three variables, we want to be able to use, a ratio of those three things to um, to deliver, hot water. That would be a good something that could be said. But I don't know that the C404 letter section is being shared until the problem is all the public comments come in at the last minute, and so you can't see any of them, and you can't really support a letter until that.
That's good. Thanks for the explanation. I just knew that was a concern. I think Olivia had some concerns around that, and so I just wanted to see where that was at, but appreciate the explanation.
Kel, are you able to provide information on who's leading that support letter effort? Or if
Yeah,
not,
both
that's
David
fine.
and I are part of a really informal work group that has had comments on that. I believe that Lisa Rosenow has worked on a bunch of the C404 things. A lot of other people have weighed in on it, and there is an informal work group that has worked with the commercial code and C406 that is going to provide a long letter that suggests lots of changes that will clean up C404, but also many, many other sections of the code that, we found issues with over time. So there will be a long letter, and the group doesn't have a name. It's an informal work group that has been working with PNNL on the C406 credits. And, as you play test things, you discover like, oh, this and this and this and this. So this happens every cycle. Last cycle, there were, I don't know, maybe hundreds of minor comments, or between minor and major comments, hundreds of them. And, the council worked through those and ended up with a code that, is what it is. And I think the same thing will happen this cycle.
Yeah, I'm sure, if you were reviewing the code and seeing, I'm sure Kimberly, your team is like found a number of things that may either be inconsistent or want to comment on. And I think most of them are likely being addressed in parallel through these other groups, but it couldn't hurt to at least raise them. Maybe you don't actually have to propose change, like substantive changes, but at least commenting like this, this needs to be fixed and this needs to be addressed. Certainly reinforce that work. And I guess I would say, around that point, like I think there's, to be frank, like I think there's a group of people that might think it'd be great to just be able to go back to using gas water heaters. They're simple, they're low cost, they're and great. The code now allows that. The 21 Washington State Energy Code made that decision a little bit less. It made it not as like direct, so to speak, as I think the 24 code. But I would, if you're going to go through and play test like the new C46 section with using gas water heating, I'll tell you right now, it's going to be quite a lift in other efficiency measures to not use some amount of heat pumps in your building. And I think that's in the direction that was intentional to push people in the direction of at least acknowledging that they're going to have to electrify that system to some degree, and hopefully building the electric capacity in there from the beginning to support full electrification as heat pump water heating technology evolves. So I think even though gas water heating is now very clearly a possibility in the code, it always was. But I think now your teams are going to maybe be doing more analysis to see what it would take to do that if that's of interest to teams to do that. But I would just kind of indicate it's going to be challenging.
There was a question earlier about EV charging and readiness, and I don't know, David, if you want to talk briefly about that, and then
Yeah. Based on a quick review, it looks like the EV charging requirements are generally the thresholds, the percentage of spaces required, at least for the spaces that you had to install chargers for, that has not changed in the draft IBC update. But it's between EV ready and EV capable that there's been a shift from more reducing the EV ready spaces required to increasing the EV capable spaces required. So EV ready is for people, it's like putting raceway and conduit and a circuit and wiring all the way to the point of where you could install a charger without a lot of additional electrical work. That's EV ready. EV capable is just installing the conduit, the raceway conduit, to the point of which you might install. You don't have to pull the wire. You don't have to add a breaker. You do need to account for it in transformer sizing and other main service calculations, but it's in general, I think it would actually will reduce the cost of first cost for EV charging requirements in multifamily. So, but that's just based on my kind of limited understanding of those cost impacts.
DP, do you want to bring us up?
Yeah, sorry. Well, I wanted to jump in on the EV readiness piece because it's not exactly the same percentages that are remaining. So currently, the code says that you should have 10% EV installed, 25% EV ready, 10% EV capable for a total coverage of 45% of spaces in large multifamily buildings. The proposal that was put in by BAW that was moved forward to the CR 102 is 10, then bringing that 25% down to 10 and 40. So it's 60% coverage instead of 45% overall. But I will say that was after King County had submitted a different proposal during the tag process that took it up to 100% coverage with more of that tilted towards EV capable. And so I just wanted to mention that Climate Solutions had also signed onto a letter in this public comment period for EV readiness where we were asking for 10, 10, 70% EV capable. I'm not sure if that's gonna be incorporated by the Building Code Council. There wasn't a ton of other support for it, but just wanted to mention that and flag that the reason for this was that yes, the EV capable category has much fewer upfront costs as far as we can tell, but because we're making this compromise on bringing down the percentage for EV readiness, we wanted to push up the EV capable more so that people are the parking lots are more future proofed for EV charging in the future. So
yeah, thanks, Diva.
And I should mention that the public comment period for that is over because it was not in the energy code, but the State Building Code Council will still have to vote on the building code along with all the other codes. So there is always opportunity to provide comment during the meeting in which they ultimately vote, which is September 25th. But that doesn't apply to any of the other proposals that we've talked about today, just the EV readiness. The rest are being considered through this week.
Anyone have any concerns or questions about the sign-on letters? You planning on signing on?
Quite a bunch today.
Elevate's planning on signing on. I'll just say that.
So,
Okay. Patience, I see you off mute.
No, I was responding to say I saw a couple of head nods. So I think we've got some folks who appreciate the work. it would be great for us to quickly send the letter at least one more time today and be sure we're reaching as many members and folks who can sign on as we can, and understand any concerns that might be raised. Dave, I had a question on the electrical infrastructure and if we anticipate any additional cost where the load is not sufficient. Have we seen any such scenarios, and how are we coordinating with utility providers to avoid any escalated cost on providers?
On the new construction
Mhm.
impacts. That will largely depend on those decisions I mentioned on what systems you use. But you know, if you are already building multifamily with electric heat or heat pumps in your apartments and more or less 100% heat pump water heating, that's still going to be the trajectory for 2024 code buildings. The solar has gone up a bit, but I don't think that's going to have any impact on the electrical infrastructure, or at least the utility connection side. So yeah, there are some provisions on the in the alteration section of the 2024 Washington State Energy Code that would impact existing buildings. Those There's some provision that would require you to convert a furnace with an AC, a rooftop furnace with AC equipment to be a heat pump piece of equipment. But that is a lot of kind of provisions that allow you to not have to do that if you don't have the electrical infrastructure to support it. And generally speaking, there are other changes in the alteration section. That may be another follow-up meeting that we could have to drill into those. But in general, my recollection is that affordable housing has an exception for some of the more costly provisions in Chapter 5.
Thank you.
Although I would say that we do see a lot of grant opportunities and other opportunities to support that decarbonization effort. And there's a lot of other reasons to start doing that planning. But the energy code, I think, will largely not require affordable housing to decarbonize when they have to replace equipment.
Super. Laura, you can bring us home.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining today. This has been really helpful, and I really want to acknowledge the team that has done the deep dive on getting this ready. Chell Anderson, Deepa Sivarajan, and David Reddy, who joined us today, also on this little task force that we've had doing this deep dive. Want to acknowledge that Jason Acosta from RDH and Rachel Kohler from Shift Zero also participated. And these letters are hosted through Shift Zero with support of this group. So any questions that you have, I will be sending out information this afternoon with these links and the slides. And hopefully I'll be able to get the recording uploaded today, but if not today, by early tomorrow morning. So thank you all for participating, and feel free to respond to me, and I can pass through any additional comments or questions, or feel free to reach out to any of these people directly as well. Any final thoughts before I end this here? All right. Well, hearing none, thank you again, and we'll look forward to seeing this proceed. Take care.
Thanks.